Welcome to the Top M&A Entrepreneurs. Today, my guest is Pardis Nasseri from Palm Tree LLC. Pardis has done successfully over $30 billion in transactions. Welcome to the show, Pardis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this because we were scheduled a couple times. So I got to ask you a question. I was just reading an LA Times article that you actually started as an independent sponsor, and it's evolved into something else. So tell me, let's go back a little bit first, back to PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then that story there, and then we'll go to Platinum Equity, and then Palm Tree.
Absolutely. So family immigrated here. Most of my family are not business people. They're doctors and lawyers and engineers. So I had no idea that there was this whole field of, investments and M&A and private equity. And then I started in public accounting, and public accounting was great, but it wasn't my calling. And I transitioned over to the transaction services group within PwC, which is the first time I actually learned about mergers and acquisitions and buying and selling companies. And really enjoyed doing that work. But I wanted to get away from being an advisor to actually being an investor and doing the work myself. So, I started working as an advisor at PwC, and I really liked that, but I wanted to leave the advisory world and go into the buy side. But prior to doing that, it was kind of hard to go from public accounting straight into private equity. Managed to find a way to go to Jefferies without getting an MBA, and got into Jefferies, and it was pretty impressive how I pulled that off. But I really enjoyed my time when I was at Jefferies, working there, living in New York, and sometimes in life it's better to be lucky than smart. And it was right around May of 2008 that, right before the world melted and everything collapsed, is that I found that I got an offer to come to LA and work at Platinum Equity. So less than 1 year at Jefferies, I left Jefferies and came to Platinum. And, was in the best place I could be at the time of the global meltdown, with a private equity firm that had just raised their second fund shy of $3 billion. And I was going out on a buying spree with my clients, or with my employer at the time. And I learned so much during that time. And after a few years, I ultimately decided that for me, the entrepreneurial journey is more of where it's at, and I wanted to leave, but I still wanted to be involved around the world of M&A, because I thought it's fantastic, it's high powered, it's full speed ahead, and it's a lot of excitement. So I left Platinum and started my own company, which was basically providing a lot of the same things I did while I was at Platinum as a service to Platinum, as well as other private equity firms. And that's sort of how the story of the genesis of Palm Tree, and it's evolved a lot from there. But the one thing, going back to the independent sponsor, we had a two-pronged strategy at that first early days when I left Platinum. One part was doing the advisory work and the consulting work, and then the other side was to actually make investments and do our own investments and buy companies and build platforms. And I had a partner, and we did that for about 5-6 years. We had, some success, but ultimately I decided that I really want to focus on being an entrepreneur and investing in a different way. Instead of buying other companies, really investing in building my own company, and looking at bringing in talented people to work with me so we could create a unique organization that didn't really exist prior to us creating it.
Yeah. I got to go back to the immigration. Where did you immigrate from?
From Iran.
Iran. Interesting. Okay. It was at the transition to the mullahs, right, in that area that time?
Well, no, unfortunately not, because I was actually born in the U.S. in 1977, and everybody knows how old I am, but all your listeners know how old I am. But I was born in 1977. My father was finishing his last degree in Chicago, and then we moved back to Iran thinking, nothing was wrong, and then the revolution hit, and we actually got stuck there. And I had to live there with the mullahs, and ended up in 1988 is when my parents escaped. My mom and I went through a different country. My dad went through another country, and we ended up here. So I did live in Iran during that time where, it was pretty unsettling to be living there. And I think that shaped a lot of my resolve that I have. But that's sort of the story of kind of how it all started.
Yeah, I just, the reason I bring that up is I see people that are immigrants, they do so well because most people in the United States take a citizenship in the United States for granted. There's so many opportunities compared to other countries and the rules that they have to live under.
No, you're absolutely right, and I'm very proud of being an American citizen. I love the 4th of July, and I'm very patriotic, and because I think there's no other country that can give, and I'm not the only one. There's many people like me that you just show up here from another country and you get into the system and you're able to be successful.
Yeah, I love that story. It's a fantastic story. So let's go back to your work at this private equity, Platinum Equity. You started buying these companies, or let's say your evolution in buying the companies. What you had money, you raised capital, you bought these companies, and what was happening? Was it wasn't creating the arbitration valuation that you were looking for, or was it just personal? It's not something you like to do.
You mean like the reason why I left Platinum, or the reason why Platinum, or like the strategy that Platinum?
Yeah, the strategy what the Platinum was doing. Yeah.
So Platinum strategy was basically they were one of the premier operationally focused private equity firms. They were the first one to come out, and ever since then, there's a lot of other firms that say they're operationally focused. But if you think about the history of private equity, private equity before it was private equity, it was merchant banking. And merchant banking was investment bankers saying, hey, we're raising debt for these healthy businesses. Why don't we raise some money that we can put into work ourselves that will work effectively as an interesting way for us to create capital, right? Because if all else equal, you buy a company with some equity and debt, and then you operate it for a few years, you pay down the debt, and then you sell it. Even if the valuation doesn't increase, you've made a return on your equity because you paid down the debt. Now, that's how private equity sort of started. And then it came the idea of junk bonds or high yield bonds, and Mike Milken and Drexel Burnham at Lambert in LA that was fueling a lot of this M&A transactions. Now, the space got a little crowded. And as it started getting crowded, firms were looking at different ways that could differentiate and create value. So some were focusing on certain industries, or some were focusing on, like a type of transaction. And then in comes Platinum, who says, you know what, when you look at making money on a company, you have to look at it as an actual operation. And you go in and you tackle it, with each function. You put people that are focusing on finance, and people that are focusing on marketing, and people that are focusing on sales, to be able to make the business a lot better than it was. And a lot of those transactions they were doing were carve-outs or businesses that needed a little bit more attention to sort of achieve their true potential. And that's why they became successful. And that strategy for us, especially in 2008, when the downturn had happened, was pretty impressive, because there was a lot of companies that were suffering and needed turnaround. And we were active. And I mean, that it was like dog years, those few years. I mean, I must have looked at a couple hundred companies to invest in, and we selected like 2 or 3. It was pretty intense.
And do you keep the management on when you do that? when you were doing that?
It depends on the strategy of the firm and management's ability to perform at the new level. Oftentimes, so there's cases that management stays, and then there's some cases that management realizes, what's being asked of them is twice as hard as what they were willing to do before, or they were doing before, so they end up leaving. So it's a mixed bag. I think it takes an evolved manager to realize the new rules of engagement and want to sign up to doing it. So it does happen.
Yeah. So let me ask you about Palm Tree now. What are you doing? Like, give me a brief overview of what you do for clients now.
Yeah. So we're unique in that we've got 3 different lines of service. One line of service being investment banking, which is basically, you're helping companies raise capital or sell themselves or bring in a new partner. And then you're also doing transaction services, which is the financial due diligence that gets involved in sort of making sure you're buying a right company, or on the sell side, making sure you're presenting the company in the best light. And then the third leg of the stool
is that quality of earnings? Are you doing quality? Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And then the third leg of the stool is what happens the first 100 days after you buy a company. So that post-close transition and transformation, which oftentimes ends up being longer than the first 100 days because you identify things that you need to fix to be able to create value. And then we have teams that continue doing that for some time after.
Let me ask you a question about raising capital in debt. If you go smaller, lower middle market, SMB, you're borrowing SBA rates at 11%. Buddy of mine, we're working on a larger deal, middle market, 22 million, and our sources are 6.785%. Where's that money coming from? The cheaper money.
The cheaper money is coming from institutional capital, and it's coming from funds that have larger capital to deploy, and they have different hurdle rates and different return thresholds. So they're able to be a little bit more aggressive, although the rates have gone up significantly. So you're potentially not, those rates are probably a little bit higher, but like anything else, the market builds in a premium for the smaller companies because the likelihood of default for those smaller companies is a lot higher than the bigger companies. So that's why they charge you more.
Yeah.
So their cost of capital may be the same. It's just that half of those loans may never come back.
Yeah, they got to factor that in, I guess. They give us a range of 6.875 to 8 point something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right now. I mean, debt is very expensive right now.
So what do you do on the due diligence and the quality earnings? This is what I'm concerned about, especially in the upper middle market. And I'm going to evolve my question to how AI fits in that, because I've been playing with it recently, and it is saving so much time in so many ways for me individually that I can imagine what it's going to disrupt in a bigger industry.
Well, it's you touch something that is basically near to my heart, because you saw this. If you haven't seen it, look it up. Microsoft announced Copilot, and so I found out about Chat GPT late last year, and I have a lot of friends overseas, and I was in this chat group, and I couldn't sleep, and I got up, and it was just come out, and I started playing around with it, and I said, this is going to revolutionize the way we do everything, because there's a lot of manual involvement in getting the data and analyzing it, and then in terms of the quality of earnings, putting that in a report and actually writing that report and giving it to your client. With Chat GPT or AI or other machine learning, I see a future where you have a database that's filled with all your past reports, and as you go to create a new report, you just say what industry it's in, what size revenue it is, and then it pre-populates it for you, and you just go in and edit it as an editor, as opposed to creating content from scratch. That's going to save so much time. Now, the challenge with automation completely taking over the process of due diligence is that if you've ever done due diligence, you realize that most companies, their financials are pretty messy. So if you're talking about a multi-location, multi-geography, international conglomerate, well, who's to say that the accountants in each country are using the line items exactly the same way? So there is this concept of, what goes in is what you get out. So garbage in, garbage out. There has to be, you can't uniform it. So until you get to a point where every company is using their chart of accounts exactly the same and putting the same type of expenses in each line item, using AI to be able to really streamline diligence is going to be challenging. Now, you can use AI to be able to line up your trial balances and look for trends, and then you still need to have the human interaction. But what could take a week before to do, now you can do in like a day and a half. So that is the future. It's going to be a lot of efficiency that's going to get created, which honestly, John, I think it's going to take us back to, if you look at the deal makers pre-Excel, they weren't spending time creating these complex Excel models. They had to really understand the fundamental finance topics and understand the way business worked to be able to make a good decision. Somewhere along the line, we sort of lost the plot with creating these massive models and building these things in Excel. Now, if that can be done by robots, we can go back to really understanding the fundamentals of business and structuring a transaction. And to me, that's actually exciting.
Yeah, it's those data sets. If you've got chart of accounts in some other platform and a chart of accounts over here in some other platform, you're just not going to get like you said, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting time we're in right now, and I'm very excited about it. I'm we're not like the big firms. We don't have deep pockets to take an entire team of like 100 people and allocate them to R&D. But we are partnering with with other digital transformation and AI firms to explore ways we can be more efficient in what we do. Because as you go into the future, everything you do, and this goes for everybody that's listening to your show that's investing in companies, any business that you're looking to invest in that has a heavy human involvement, you should be asking yourself, how is this going to get disrupted? How can this be replaced by software or by a machine? And whether it's a process or whether it's an actual sales channel. And you need to be thinking about that right now because we're on this verge of transformation. And I'm sure you've heard of Moore's Law. Gordon Moore passed away a couple of weeks ago. Is that every year computing power is going to double, and it's crazy the computing power we have available to us and how that's being used to transform things. And every investor, every business owner needs to be thinking about
that. What size of deals do you look for or work on?
So it depends on which side of the house. I would say on our transition and transformation side of the house, where we're doing the first 100 days post-close, those are larger deals. Those are multi-billion-dollar transactions. On our due diligence side of the house, we're looking at stuff that's 250 million down to like 50 million, and our investment bank does somewhere between 700 million to 300 million. In terms of transactions.
I have to ask you about this. I just saw a report that Warren Buffett unloaded some stock from a Taiwanese manufacturer because he thinks there's a possibility of war. I mean, and I saw you did some deal in China, Hong Kong. What's your kind of opinion on that?
We're in a very interesting time right now with geopolitical activity that's happening and this potential shift of power that's trying to happen between, Russia, China, my former homeland, Iran, and the U.S. and then everything else. I mean, you also saw Macron, the president of France, going and trying to strike his own deals and negotiate
the dollar,
Yeah, so there's this weird thing happening, and I think the outside world is looking at the U.S. has had, the last 6 years have been somewhat unstable for us here in the U.S. between the previous administration and the current administration. So our enemies are sort of thinking that we're weaker than we've ever been, and it's an interesting time to be looking at and thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, I think there's
right.
And that's where they're placing their bets. That's where the geopolitical allies are placing their bets right now. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's too early to kind of to tell what's going to happen. I think we have to see what happens with the elections this upcoming year. And then, when you walk around if you drive around the US or if you fly around to different cities have different economic profiles, right? So we're heavily investing in Texas and in Dallas because that city is booming. That state is booming, and the economy there's no sign of recession. And then you go look at San Francisco and LA, and you're like, it looks a little tough.
Yeah, I used to live in San Francisco. I can't believe the crime that's happening that I'm hearing from people. Just like I can't keep my car locked. It gets broken in all the time, etc.
It's crazy. It's pretty sad, to be honest.
Yeah. Hey, I got a question. This is popping up too. Is you're looking at these larger companies with their ESG scores. How is that changing due diligence and investment banking?
I think it's from an investment banking standpoint, you're going in and you're helping a company do a transaction, right? So you don't really care what their ESG policy has been. You do care what it's going to be in the future. So private equity firms coming in, and you think about who private equity firms are, they're asset allocators, and they have funds from a lot of public pension plans and institutions, and those institutions, those institutions are requiring them to have a focus on ESG, and not just ESG now, but also DEI. So a private equity firm going in, they absolutely have to have a strategy for buying a company on how do they implement ESG as well as DEI. And I think it's a great thing because we do need to be mindful of these things. And just because we've done something the same way for the past doesn't mean that's the way you have to do it. You have to evolve. You have to learn things. You have to do things differently. So I see it as an opportunity because if a company has it, getting acquired by a private equity firm means that they're going to be able to take it better, and they actually had the desire and the initiative to do it. So now they're going to be able to achieve more from it. And if they didn't have it, private equity firms are going to make sure they have it, which means it's going to be better for everybody involved.
You think so? I mean, look, I think I don't know if we sit on the same side of that, because I'm watching just recently that equity score of Dylan Mulvaney and putting him up in front of doing Anheuser Busch, and I've seen they've lost $4 to $6 billion in value just in the last couple of weeks. That was
Well, I see why you're saying that, and I can understand that. I guess I'm more focused on it from if you look at the ESG, that has become a
yeah.
very politicized term. Like you almost have to break that up. When I'm talking about ESG, I'm really focused on the E, and because I think the environment is very important, and that environmental aspect of it, you have to be mindful of. Now, by being mindful is you actually have to do the research and not just regurgitate what headlines, talking heads are pushing out. I don't know if that's happening.
Yeah, I don't think so. And when you say you're investing in Texas, is that what kind of companies? Is there oil companies too, or what?
No, we're opening we're expanding our foothold in Texas and sending more people down there and looking to create a bigger office in
Oh, I
Texas
got
in
you. I got
Dallas,
you.
starting in
The
Dallas.
reason I said that is like another saw this recent interview with the guy from Shark Tank. Just was going to invest in a oil refinery.
That's the opposite of ESG, right?
There you go. Yeah. So tell me about this. How do customers find you, and is it all referral, or are you having to do some kind of marketing aside from getting in a podcast? I guess like I know a private equity guy has gotten on 100 podcasts, and he says, "Man, I don't have to do anything else in marketing."
No, we were just recently starting the podcast route and kind of talking to people, and my focus has changed. I'm fortunate that I have a very strong leadership team at the company that are managing the lines of service and the people and our clients and all that stuff. But the work that we do is like you're not going to go do a Google search or read a Yelp review if you're going to do brain surgery, right? You're going to go to your trusted doctor. You're going to talk with them. You're going to talk to people that you really trust who've been through that process. And an M&A transaction is like brain surgery. Like it's something that most people do one time in their life. You can't mess it up. It has to be well thought out. And so this is up for the investment banking side. So they go to people that they trust, and that's all referral relationships. On the private equity side, when the private equity person isn't going to try, isn't going to risk their career by trying a firm that they found out about on a Google ad, right? They're also going to go work with somebody that they know through referral. So for us, our number one business development tool or technique is doing good work. So making sure that the work product we deliver every day is the highest quality, and that itself works out. So it's a longer play. We've been doing this for almost 13 years now, and so we have a good reputation that we've built that we've never sacrificed, and we continue to focus on the quality of the product that we put out and quality of the people that we bring into the organization.
Yeah. By the way, those two last statements, M&A is like brain surgery, and the number one tool we use are great shorts. I mean, that is great shorts to use. YouTube shorts, stuff like that to bring in.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Hey, I want to go back to the due diligence, quality of earnings report on how you score somebody's business. Let me give you an example. We're looking at a lower middle market business. It's a fencing business, and they did pretty well, 3.2 million in EBITDA in 2022. But they told us they're not going to do that much this year. on how you score that going forward, even though it's a business that's been around from 1976?
Yeah, so the biggest concept of quality of earnings is to be able to show your normalized earnings a company does, right? So, and I'll give you a perfect example is, let's say the company was involved in a lawsuit and they win like $1 million settlement in their favor. And that $1 million goes into the income statement. Now they come and show you that they have an EBITDA that's got that $1 million baked into it. Quality of earnings says, no, you got to take that out. So you, as the buyer, you're the one who has to decide if you want to buy the company or not. And the way you do that is you look at the past, because the trend is your friend, right? The past is a good predictor of the future. And then you build a model and you build the projections to say, because you're buying the company based on its future potential, but what dictates the future potential is the past performance. Yeah. So what we do in quality of earnings is say, okay, well, we think they had a COVID bump. They had a lot more revenue come in because of COVID. And the reason we know that is because we looked at the last 5 years and they've been operated at 35% lower in terms of revenue or margin or whatever than they did this year. So we normalize for that and give you a set of numbers that are more in line with what we think the business should be doing on a normalized basis. And then it's up to you to underwrite and say, okay, if I plug that into my model, what's the growth I'm anticipating based on what they've done in the past? And you may have some information that you don't want to share with the seller, like, oh, I'm going to plug this into my existing platform, or I have a network that wants this, and then you can justify the revenue growth, but you're not going to pay the seller for that. That's a secret you keep to yourself. And you just basically, a conversation ends up happening saying, hey, you guys use your bankers and you went to market and he said your EBITDA was 5 million. We've done our quality of earnings and we think your run rate EBITDA is really 4 million because you have that $1 million insurance settlement that you've put into that we're taking out. Now if you're buying the company for, let's just pick simple math, say 10 times, that's 40 million. That's a $10 million saving because they were expecting 50 million. You're saying I'm going to pay you 40 million. And the deal may die or may not happen at that point, right? It just depends on how aggressive the seller is and how realistic really the seller is with their expectations. So for us, it's just literally breaking down the performance of the business to take out any noise or any one-time and non-recurring. And that could go the opposite direction as well. In the case of the lawsuit, it could be they get zero, but they actually have paid $1 million in legal fees, and you add that back because you're not. Yeah, because you're not in the business of having lawsuits every year, so we're going to give you credit for that expense.
What have you ever given somebody a quality earnings report and given a range that we think that the forecast projected earnings was inside that range or outside that range, and what kind of changed that?
Yeah, you absolutely always give them, one additional analysis you do is say, okay, the private equity firm says, okay, now take the projections that the company has and tell us how realistic you think they are in light of the historical performance. And so we'll look at that and we'll say, hey, we think it's aggressive. And that ultimately comes down to digging into the numbers behind the forecast. Right? The worst way to do a forecast is to say, well, we did 10 million last year and we'd like to have 25% growth this year, so our revenue is going to be 12 and a half. That's like the absolute worst way, because what's justifying that 25% growth? You have to break that down into like your performance with your customers. Well, our top 10 customers have told us that they're going to be increasing their purchases with us by 25% next year, and they want us to anticipate that and start building in, inventory. And so now you have a justifiable case for the 25% growth. But if you don't do that, and if you just say, well, I want it to be 25% higher, so I'm going to add 25%, that's like wishful thinking. Most seasoned private equity professionals, when they evaluate a company, they assume zero revenue growth. Some of them actually assume revenue decline. So they're looking at, if the revenue declines, am I able to still justify the debt and service the debt that I'm putting on the balance sheet and hold on to it for a few years and then make money when I sell it? That's what they look at.
Yeah. Hey, so these three roles you play, investment banker, quality of earnings, due diligence, the first 100 days, is that something three packages that you offer everybody, or so what somebody does one, just investment banking, you want to raise money? and then you kind of upsell or downsell the others?
It's a little bit of both. So we have had cases where we've used all three. Now, if we're writing the book and our investment bank is going to market with a Palm Tree branded offering memorandum, we tend to not do the quality of earnings that's Palm Tree branded because that's a conflict of interest. What we do in those cases is we provide a lighter touch quality of earnings, meaning that we do all the work and we prepare all the numbers, knowing that the buyer is going to bring in their own advisor. So we give them numbers that make sense and have had all the work done, so it makes their diligence process a lot easier and a lot faster. But we do provide all the services for our investment banking side. On the private equity side, which is, our investment bank is like 85% privately held businesses and 50% private equity. The consulting side, which is the transition and transformation and the due diligence practice, that's the exact inverse. So most private equity firms will use us for one, maybe two services, but not all three.
Yeah.
All three
I
sides
got
of the
a
house.
curious question because they used to use the word Chinese wall. Is that racist now to say that?
I don't know. I haven't had to think about that, but I don't think it is because it's probably talking about the Great Wall of China, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's talking about. So I actually, it came up in a conversation I was at today. We're a smaller organization, so we can't credibly say, hey, we're completely separate because we operate as one firm, one vision, one organization, because we believe our value is in not having silos and having the whole firm working together. And it's great from a recruiting young talent standpoint, because I wish there was a firm like Palm Tree when I graduated from undergrad, because you go in as an analyst and you get to spend time in investment banking, time in due diligence, and then time in the post-close transition world. And you finish that after 2 years. If you decide to go get an MBA, great. If not, you can stay in the company and you have a pretty good understanding of pretty much everybody involved in a strategic event in an organization, and you can decide which path you want to go, because these are all different paths. They have different demands on people. They require different personality types to be successful. So those are all things that you need to be aware of, and that you don't when you come out of undergrad, right? And you're like, well,
Yeah,
what
100 hours a week. That's all I want.
yeah, and like one new undergrad, and let alone some professional, is aware enough to know their personality and then what works well for them, and then what the job demands of them. Right, that takes a lot of time for you to develop that, and we give that ability to our analysts really pretty quickly, because they understand with the exposure, like they know that they're different than the guy that's in investment banking, who is more is a risk taker, and they're like more risk averse. So okay, you're probably going to mean due diligence, and the other one's going to mean investment banking. But that some of that stuff you don't have access to if you're not exposed to it.
There's a big market out there. Let me go back to that investment banking. Are you becoming an investment banker, broker dealer, licensed just to raise capital for other clients' acquisitions, or are you actually raising the capital to purchase your own investments private?
No, so we have an actual broker dealer because we want to provide this as a service to our clients. If we wanted to do it for ourselves, we wouldn't need. It's interesting, the rules. If you're raising money for yourself, you don't need to be licensed.
Yeah.
But and we went through the whole, and there's a lot of investment bankers out there. So if any of your clients are planning on using an investment banker, it's really important to make sure that investment banker has their own broker dealer. There's a lot of smaller investment banks that use another investment bank's license, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that just tells you how serious that investment bank is about their long-term prospects, because they didn't even invest in getting the broker dealer set up. Usually that scenario works for like, hey, I'm one guy and I have relationships and I want to go and try to monetize my relationship, so I'll use somebody else's license. It's not easy to go through the whole regulatory process to set up your investment banking license and then maintain it. And we went through that. It's expensive. It's costly. I mean, it's
when's the ROI on this?
Well, you make the ROI. We've passed that, and we've been fortunate. We've had, we got our welcome letter from FINRA in November of 2020, right before Thanksgiving, and since then, in less than 2.5 years, we've done over $1 billion of transactions. that we've sold companies or raised capital, and that's pretty impressive for a firm of our size if you think about that in that short period of time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Bart, this is fantastic. I love these segments here talking about this. Let me ask you a question. What in your opinion, what makes a successful acquisition? What are you looking for that target criteria, not only financially but culturally fit?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think it's all about the integration of the company, and the integration heavily depends on the culture. Because if you buy a firm, and especially if it's a people heavy firm, if it's a service oriented organization, you have to make sure that the culture of the people coming in are aligned completely with the culture of your organization, especially if you're buying it to integrate them together. And I've seen a lot of transactions go wrong because you're asking the acquired company to perform by a set of rules they've never even signed up for, and you're going to have attrition. It's going to be problematic, and that leads into a very bad acquisition. So it really comes down to the integration and making sure that the cultural stuff, the core values of the company, those are all aligned. And this is stuff that people don't talk about, but as we continue to create efficiencies through technology and getting smarter at finding the business issues, the things that we're going to have to focus on more is the soft stuff, and that's the core values, and that's the culture, and that's what makes people show up to work and come to work every single day, because that's the difference. That's the difference between you having a great company or just a good company.
Give me an example of you have a conversation, you've got an owner operator that's buying a company, and it's not a cultural fit. I mean, they could be conservative or liberal in the base. I go, look, it's not going to be a cultural fit. Well, what's the story?
It could be even more. It's probably even easier than that, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. CEOs who get excited about doing M&A, it's a vanity play for them, right? They want to grow their organization. They want to double in size. So they end up usually paying more than a financial buyer does. And a financial buyer is very disciplined. They're looking at, are the numbers going to make sense? Am I going to make a financial return on this? Because their job is to do that, to make a financial return. Yeah, I got a buddy that calls it, I buy cash flow. That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. So, and EBITDA is a proxy for cash flow, right? So, but the strategic ones where the CEO is going out there, the CEO could have a great culture and they could have a competitor that's the same size, and they get focused on, oh, wow, I'm going to bring these two companies together. I'm going to be a CEO of a double the size company. Now, his company has got a pay structure where everybody works together, and all the extra margin goes into a pot, and at the end of the year, they decide who gets what based on contribution to the firm, overall success of the business, tenure with the organization. The other organization, everybody's got a formulaic number of they get a percentage of what they bring in. That organization is going to have sharp elbows. You bring that in, and if it's a sales-heavy organization, these two are not going to mesh well together. And you're going to pay a lot of money, and you're going to lose the talent on the other side, or you're going to lose the talent on your side because they're not going to figure out how to play nice together. And you have a monumental task ahead of you for integrating these two companies together. So that is really, compensation drives culture, and you have to be very diligent about it.
What are this, like Charlie Munger said about compensation? I can tell you what it's going to look like just by their comp plan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, what's the conversation you have with CEOs? Because CEOs are pretty known to having a big ego and not listening to ideas. Like, hey, this is not going to work out. What do you say to them?
It's interesting you say that, because leadership has evolved significantly, and my own journey as an entrepreneur, my leadership style has evolved a lot. And in the old days, it was like the Jack Welch, the GE scenario, where I'm at the top, I tell you what you need to do, and you go
cut
do
off
it.
From the bottom, and you're out.
Yeah, exactly. Now, where we are today, it's like the role of the CEO is to just basically walk around and make sure everybody in the company is supported and has what they need to be the best in their job. And it's almost like being a therapist to your leaders and your managers to make sure they're in the right spot. They can give you what they want to do. They can give you what you need, and they're willing to give it to you. So that's an interesting perspective. And if you think about CEOs that get excited about an acquisition, the good ones that will take your advice will understand that. And you may have to remind them, but they'll get it. The ones that get really fixated, and say no, come hell or high water, I want to do this transaction, that's not gonna work out well. And we have been in situations where we've said, you know what, our moral compass isn't aligned to yours, and we're exiting this. We're not doing this anymore. So we're terminating our mandate. We'll cancel our fee. You guys go ahead and do it yourself, because we can't. We don't want to be associated with this, because you see a disaster happening. Because that individual, when the going gets tough and when things get bad, they're going to want to point the finger to somebody, because they're not aware that it's them.
That'll be you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what are you seeing more successful in acquisition, a strategic acquisition or financial acquisition? And what are
I've seen them both successful. It's just how disciplined they are. The key comes down to discipline. It's like if you're sitting down at the blackjack table and the dealer gives you, a 17, you hit, right? And if you bust, you don't change your strategy. That's the strategy. That's what the rule book says. You hit on up to 17 and then you stop hitting, right? And that's the same thing. Just because if you find something wrong in the diligence process, you don't do the transaction, or you go and you build guardrails around it, or you bring down the valuation. The gentleman who founded the private equity firm I used to work at, Platinum Equity, he would say that there's no such thing as a bad deal, just a bad price, because that deal, despite the issues it may have, it may still be a good transaction. You just don't want to. I would say don't mess up culture, because culture is something you can't really fix, and you have to make sure the cultures are aligned, and you can manage and control that culture, especially if you're doing a merger or you're doing a tuck-in acquisition. But you have to be disciplined about your diligence process.
Yeah, when your guy at Platinum said there's no such thing as a bad deal, just a bad price, was he putting that into the strategic bucket price? Because everybody can say, hey, I'm buying strategic because I can plug this company into my channel and make my money back in X amount of time.
I think that was more from a platform standpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
More from buying a company that you're trying to build up and have it be a platform that then you can do strategic acquisitions on by growing it through a buy and build. So that initial platform.
Beautiful, man. Pardis, I really appreciate you showing up on the show, and I know we scheduled a number of times, but thank you so much.
I'm glad it worked out today, and I look forward to seeing it.
I hope this video has inspired you. If you need help buying your first $1 million business, make sure to visit me at dealflowsystem.net. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe down below. Comment on it, share it, tell everyone about it. And thanks for watching.